What's the biggest risk you've ever taken in your professional career?
Risk taking at Accenture got me into a fair amount of trouble, but is also probably what propelled me through the organization. In entrepreneurship, you have to back yourself. Having 4 companies in 3 years before Nabta was not about having a bunch of businesses. It was about trying to find out what I actually wanted to build. You know when you want it enough because it is the thing you can't put down. When you are in the shower or in the car or exhausted after a day with kids, you don't reach for the remote control, you don't put on Netflix. Like, my instinctive reaction in those moments is to reach for Nabta.
How do you explain Nabta Health in 30 seconds to people?
Our focus is on preventative care. When we founded Nabta, women are responsible for 80% of consumption decision-making and 80% of caregiving globally. So whatever we built, it had to give women back their time. I have got 76 angel investors. I've invested between $1,000 and $1 million a piece. Trust and money, it is my fiduciary responsibility to protect, and not just to protect, but to grow.
Hello, I'm Kieran O'Connor and welcome back to the Calculated Risk podcast. Today for episode 7, I am joined by Sophie Smith. Sophie is the founder and CEO of Nabta Health, who have just raised their $2 million Series A round to continue growing their hybrid women's healthcare platform across the Middle East and Africa. Sophie, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I've been looking forward to this one. It's been something that I wanted to do, speaking to an entrepreneur who's focusing on women's health. Me and Skylar have said this is something that is a big priority at the minute. So well done for going on the journey.
Thank you.
What's the biggest risk you've ever taken in your professional career and how did it play out?
I think my professional career has been a series of happy accidents and somewhat calculated risks. Perhaps the very first thing I did once I got a job at Accenture in terms of risk-taking was related to securing my first role with them, where we were being interviewed for a project with an international bank, and they wanted an analyst who was going to manage the kind of site list for them. So this was, at the time, over 12,000 individual sites, including ATMs around the world. It needed a lot of sorting out. I had come from a history degree and spent approximately 0% of my time over the past 3 years having anything to do with spreadsheets. But I had, when my parents bought a house aged 9, sorted and categorized all of the houses that they were thinking of buying based on the cost per square meter. So I had, from about 12 years previously, some spreadsheet experience. And I said, without hesitation, I can do this. I can manage this critical part of this project delivery for this international bank. And the manager looked at me slightly askance and was like, your confidence levels are way above where they should be. But I was then the manager of it. I got the role, was responsible for the site list, spent then the next 2 years on that project, basically working out what we could switch on and off at different sites. Was promoted in 14 months to a consultant, which is pretty quick in Accenture terms. And risk-taking at Accenture got me into a fair amount of trouble in the almost 4 years that I was with them, but is also probably what propelled me through the organization.
So it's safe to say then and maybe now it's a say yes and work it out after mentality.
Yeah, I think in entrepreneurship, which is obviously where I've ended up as in life, you have to back yourself. I think I've been someone who has been given many opportunities in my life and also supported from a very early age to solve problems. You know, my mum used to tell me that when I was 3, I would cover the entire carpet in our house with puzzles, you know, ranging from like 50-piece up to 1,000-piece puzzles. And I would endlessly puzzle until the entire carpet was covered. I remember doing it. I remember kind of lining them all up. And I think if you have that sort of problem-solving tendency and you're used to figuring things out and you can back yourself in the figuring of things out, then you're not afraid to take risks or do difficult things or get yourself in trouble because you're pretty sure that you can get yourself out of it as well.
And what's your risk tolerance like now? Because you've obviously gone through different stages in your life. You're now a mum of 4 as well. Nabta Health has been running for 8 years. So now, today, sitting in front of me, what's your risk tolerance like?
I think my risk tolerance is still high potentially higher than it should be, but all of the risks are significantly more calculated than they used to be. I see it in my children, particularly my daughters. They are a jump first, ask questions later bunch. Whereas now I can still probably make decisions with, 50 to 70% of the available information. But I put a lot more effort and structured time into risk management and mitigation because there's a lot more at stake. It's not just my 4 children who are 8, 6, 4, and 2 and still very dependent on me. It's not the fact that Nabta is still not yet profitable, so reliant on external capital. And we employ on a full or part-time basis over 35 individuals now. But also the fact that I have got 76 angel investors who over the last 8.5 years have invested between $1,000 and $1 million a piece, and whose trust and money it is my fiduciary responsibility to protect, and not just to protect, but to grow. There are a lot of things that are relying on me to take care of them and support their growth in a sustained and sensible way. And that means that, risks have to be more calculated.
And just reading between the lines, listening to you, it sounds like you use all that responsibility as power and motivation to keep pushing forward and keep showing up every day rather than letting it own you and define you and get on top of you.
It's a great privilege. Like, it is a privilege to be able to employ people. It is a privilege for people to put their trust in you. It's not something I take for granted at all. I think, again, probably growing up, I've been a little bit conditioned for it. I have 7 younger brothers and sisters. And from an early age, I very much acted as a third parent to them. I was making packed lunches and listening to reading and helping with bath times and bedtimes from the age of 8 or 9. So I'm used to taking responsibility for things. In fact, all of my most dramatic nightmares growing up were of situations where all of my siblings were under threat. There were snakes everywhere, and I was having to rescue them from snakes or administer anti-venom or stuff like this to protect them. So in my subconscious, drilled into me from a very early age, is responsibility. And it's something that I view as a privilege. And it doesn't bother me. I know some people feel the weight of it. Perhaps I do. Perhaps I've just gotten used to internalizing that as well. Who knows? But yeah, it's an immense privilege to be able to move through this world with the ability to support other people.
Yeah, I agree, actually. I feel that as well. To provide opportunity to other people is really a privilege.
Yes, and to provide them with opportunities that they might not get elsewhere. I'm somebody who has had to prove that I'm capable of things a lot. I heard a lot when I was growing up, Sophie's crazy, she's stubborn, people trying to kind of put me into boxes, and me perpetually having to say, I'm capable of more than you're giving me credit for. I did 5 A-levels and the school didn't have the ability to timetable me for the 5th. So I had to timetable myself 2 of my A-levels and ended up taking just 1 class in maths in my entire 6th form, and then learning everything else independently. And I got a pretty hard time about it. There were only a couple of teachers in the school who thought it was a good idea. And then, that's a school-based example, but at multiple different points, you have to prove yourself well beyond where other people might be required to prove themselves.
Before we come to Nabta Health, because Nabta Health is the big focus today, I want to learn as much as I possibly can about this topic. Looking back at your history, I see you've always been a creator or a builder. You've founded companies. I think you've created or founded more companies than you've been employed. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, that's correct.
Where does that come from?
What, the desire to build?
Yeah, just to build and then maybe go on to something else and build again. It's an entrepreneurial spirit. Do you know where you get that from?
No, I think I had excellent parents. I had a mother who took a very academic approach to raising us. Both my parents were doctors, but my mother stopped practicing when she had me and then had my 7 siblings, so I never went back. And she's very interested in neurodevelopment and nurturing children's inherent curiosity and creativity. and created a lot of deliberate white space for us. Time where we didn't have devices to occupy us. We didn't have television to watch, where we had to entertain ourselves. And when you are left as a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old to entertain yourself, you become creative. I take the same approach with my kids at home. They are not allowed any screen time during the week. They watch television at the weekends, but again, in quite fixed times. And they have lots of things in the house and outside that are designed to nurture creativity. So, we have magnetic tiles and Duplo and Playmobil and Lego and Brio and building blocks, and they make dens. We made an elaborate web of dens through the whole of our downstairs. Because if I make one den for one child, I then have to make 3 dens for the other 3 children. And so I think how you create blank spaces for your children when they're little to nurture their curiosity and their creativity has a lot to do with how they then enter adult life. So that's one thing. I think having 4 companies in 3 years before Nabta was not about having a bunch of businesses. It was about trying to find out what I actually wanted to build. I remember with my very first company, which was a tech consultancy, but we had this product we wanted to build. It was like a kind of like a virtual reality based, work experience world. And I was pitching it at Web Summit after hours to an investor. And never met this guy before, never seen him since. And I was midway through this pitch and he said, "Sophie, let me stop you there." I was like, "Okay." He was like, "Don't take this the wrong way, but I'm sure that whatever you do in life, you're going to end up being very successful, but this is not it." And I was like, "What do you mean this is not it?" He was like, "You don't want it enough." And I was like, "What do you mean I don't want it enough?" And he said, "When you find what you want enough, you'll know." And I agonized over this for days. What does he mean I don't want it enough? Like, I know that I want a family, for example. Does that mean I'm never going to want a business enough? And then about 6 months into Nabta, this conversation came back to me and I suddenly understood what he meant. Because when you want it enough, because it is the thing you can't put down. In the quiet moments when you are in the shower or in the car or exhausted after a day with kids, or you've had, 10 frustrating meetings in a row and you could be thinking about or doing anything else. You don't reach for the remote control. You don't put on Netflix. You don't doom scroll social media. Like, my instinctive reaction in those moments is to reach for Nabta. And when you've pitched the company 10,000 times or used the same introduction, and you should statistically be fed up of hearing the same words leaving your mouth, you're not. Like, that's when you know you want it enough. But it took me 4 companies and 3 years to figure that out.
Well, just before we come onto those 4 companies, I imagine that advice would have been quite tough to hear in the moment, thinking you want it enough, but it sounds like that's actually been quite profound and was something you needed to hear. It just took years to come. Is he an investor in Nabta now?
No, I can't even remember what he looks like. I'd never seen him before and I've not seen him since. But it was enough of a punch in the gut, because at the time, new into a company, you're convinced this is the thing that you want to build. It feels like a good idea. It came to you. No one else is doing it. Why wouldn't it be a sensible thing to build? And you feel like you're also pitching it convincingly. And so then when someone's like, "Nah, you don't want this enough," you reevaluate all your life choices.
Isn't it amazing that that's probably 10, 11 years ago? You can't remember who he is or what he looks like, but you still remember that piece of advice that he gave you.
Yeah. I mean, they say the thing that you remember is how people made you feel. Again, it was enough of a gut punch that it stuck with me. And I kind of revisited it in the short term, multiple different times. And probably it did then influence, the next company that I built. So, which was a doctor finding appointment booking platform in Pakistan. And that kind of resonated more. But with that company, I ended up liquidating our UK entity and selling my shares in the Pakistani entity to my business partner, because we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of different things, how you employ people, what the kind of business priorities were. And it was a founder misalignment issue more than anything else. But it definitely prompted a different way of thinking. Again, you never know when these happy accidents are going to occur. And sometimes you're not even cognizant of them at the time. But years later, potentially, they'll come back to you.
I'm glad you brought that up, because over the weekend I was doing a talk for PepsiCo, Middle East. They were doing a hackathon. And I was asked by some young adults what was like some life advice from a business and personal perspective. And the personal thing that I said was, people always forget what you said or what you did, but never forget how you make them feel. And when you were about to say that, I knew that was coming. And it's so important, because it's so powerful what impact you can have on people. And, it's a great example from you.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's very relevant as a parent as well. If you think back to your childhood days, you probably remember your more painful moments, because those are the ones that hurt you, were, again, enough of a gut punch that they stuck with you. And, there are still people who really knocked me for six when I was little, who I'm slightly cautious about today, if I happen to meet them again. That, I think, is a basic survival instinct. But yeah, you can't take your words back. They're very important.
So on the 4 companies you started over 3 years, if you had to summarize, all 4 into a few lessons, what sort of things did you learn? Apart from what you really want to do personally, what did you find out about building a company, hiring people and starting something from zero?
A couple of different lessons and things that we immediately then implemented with Nabta when I set it up. So having people to sense check you is a very good thing. Again, if you understand that you are not risk averse and are likely to take less calculated risks, having people who you can bounce ideas off, even if you don't want to, even if your instinct is not to sense check anything, it's a good thing to have those things in place. A board, some corporate governance, an advisory board. Also, because it then allows you to create a greater breadth of knowledge. I had a history degree and then a kind of business and technology background. But in terms of medical, my connection to the medical world was my parents. I didn't have a medical background on my own. I'm pretty good at pattern recognition and problem solving and being able to fairly succinctly identify gaps and potential solutions in a market. But there were so many things that I was missing, and I was aware of that, especially because when I founded Nabta, I was also relatively new to the Middle East. So a lot of cultural implications that I was not aware of at all. So having some mechanism to sense check you, to question you, and to ask the really hard questions is a good thing. I think other lessons that I learned from the first 4 businesses is that for me personally, impact is really important. I'm definitely an impact-driven, impact-oriented entrepreneur. And it took me time with the first companies and then probably in the first years of Nabta's life to understand how I could, without any internal conflict, connect financial and health ROI, and how within a system that is very commercially driven, create something that could genuinely bridge equity gaps while still becoming a financially sustainable business. So impact's important, but if a business isn't financially sustainable, then it's not a business, it's a charity. And think third and finally, and this is something that a lesson that I attribute to my mother, you get what you tolerate. So when you have your own business, you have the ability to choose who you work with. You might have to make some difficult decisions, and you might be in a place where you feel forced because of financial circumstances or otherwise to make certain decisions that your gut's telling you don't do it. But you shouldn't tolerate nonsense. And you definitely shouldn't tolerate people or businesses that are fundamentally toxic and draining to you. And I had done that a little bit with the first 4 companies, and I did it still in the early years of Nabta's life. But it is imprinted somewhere in my brain to not do it anymore. Like any time you ignore your gut when it comes to people or partnerships, you will pay the price at some point.
Yeah, number 3 hits home the most there, because I can confidently admit that I've been in that situation as a founder, and you have as well. And I think anyone watching this who's either a founder or done some consulting or has their own sort of hustle, there's a fine balance between saying yes because you need the money, but also that potentially impacting you in such a bad way, it's not even worth the money coming into the business. But I think I've been there and I'm learning that myself. I think that's a big focus for me over the last probably 12 months and especially this year. Say no to more bad business and just focus on the good business.
Yeah, exactly. And, again, it's the lesson that you can learn as an entrepreneur is you are trying in the early days to get your product market fit. Your product market fit shouldn't be all the bad business, or potentially you're in the wrong business. If you aren't getting the right customers for the product that you have, perhaps the product needs to change. The answer is not to sign more bad contractual agreements. That can be the difficult part because you've got cash flow constraints, you've got potentially people that you employ, you've got suppliers, you've got creditors, and all of these things, when they add up, and goodness, do they add up, can create a huge amount of pressure on you where, just the fact of being an entrepreneur is already so stressful enough, but it is not worth it.
So 4 companies before Nabta. So Nabta's the 5th. Out of how many of those did you co-found? And then how many were you the solo founder?
I was the solo founder of the first tech consultancy that I had. Co-founder in the second business, Synapse, which built this doctor finding appointment booking platform. 2024, I had a less engaged co-founder. That was a software development agency. We built a bunch of tech products for mostly UK-based like health and medical companies. And then the 4th company, Le Plastics, was a plastic recycling company that I co-founded with the guy who set up Freetown's first tech hub. So I had co-founders in businesses 2, 3, and 4. I also had an original co-founder in Nabta, Dr. Masad Arazuki, who was briefly for about 15 months my co-founder, and then for a couple of different reasons, decided that he was going to step back. And the prevailing sentiment at the time was that you had to have a co-founder. So we actually onboarded in his place another co-founder, Dr. Saba Al-Zaban, who was our chief scientific officer. She has a PhD in immunology and molecular oncology. So she was with us for 2 years and then decided that she would prefer to be full-time in lab-based research. So as of 2021, since 2021, I've been a solo founder.
And there was a reason why I asked that, because I'm a solo founder. Common knowledge, at the beginning of my business, I started out with someone. That lasted 6 months. We didn't see the direction of the business going the same way as we wanted to, and it was all amicable. We're still friends now, actually. And I interviewed someone maybe 3-4 weeks ago, and they said statistically it's proven that you have a higher chance of being successful with a co-founder or a very competent co-founder. And me as a solo founder, I find things difficult sometimes. And I wondered from your perspective, which has been, have you noticed the difference in yourself or maybe the outputs and achievements that you get when you were co-founding versus solo founder?
I think it is totally dependent on circumstance. I think the metrics that they have, mostly from Silicon Valley, very male-leaning, tend to be based on younger founders who are friends at university and co-found companies together during that time. It is totally different to co-found something with a friend when you are right at the start of your career journey with no dependents and no obligations outside of yourself, and to, potentially 15 or 20 years in a career, decide that you want to set up a business and be told you need a co-founder and have to go searching for them. I think if you organically, with someone who is just as motivated as you are, decide to set up a business, it's got a higher chance of success. If you have to artificially identify a co-founder, much lower chance of success. Frankly, again, as in any relationship, what percentage of marriages end in divorce globally? It's something like 40%. One could assume that probably a similar statistic applies to co-founding relationships. Founding a company is tough. It's very difficult to find someone who is as motivated as you are. Even in co-founding relationships, you end up with a kind of primary and a secondary and a tertiary founder. You have the person who becomes the face of the business. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. You might have a person who's kind of more in the back end. You might have 3 people who are all slightly competing to be, the primary founder. Co-founder relationships are complicated. I think I've had a lot of peace as a solo founder. Again, the sense checking mechanisms in this context for me are even more important. I'm aware that the odds are stacked against me as a solo founder and as a female founder. And so trying to preempt some of the objections that might be raised is important. But yeah, I think founding relationships are complicated. Whether you succeed or not is entirely dependent on circumstance. And actually, some of the most successful businesses in the world, if you look at Fortune 500 companies, were built by solo founders. So I have no idea still why people are implying that it's something you need, as opposed to looking at you and your individual circumstances and making an informed and subjective decision.
At what point was the UAE, Dubai, GCC region on your radar?
It was not. So definitely a happy accident again. I came here with my husband for his job in 2016, newly married, newly pregnant. It was meant to be a 3-month stint. We rocked up and it became fairly immediately apparent that this was somewhere we wanted to stay. We had the usual kind of 2-year horizon of most people who land in Dubai or did a decade ago. And I had just set up this business in Sierra Leone. It's 24 hours one way from here to Freetown via Casablanca. I thought there is absolutely no way that I can run a business in a hands-on way based here where the business is in Sierra Leone. So I started to look for something that I could do locally. And that's when I ended up setting up Nabta. And now I think I've always had a fascination with the Middle East and Africa. Again, do not ask me why. I actually studied the history of the Arab world before I went to university. And it was the history that I wanted to study at university, but the modules weren't available to me. But yeah, I fell in love with the UAE, with its people, with its, I guess, drive to innovate. Perhaps I felt a certain kinship, even with the country, of being slightly overlooked, slightly undervalued, a little bit on the back foot, all the potential and people still saying it's not going to achieve what it says it's going to do. They're not going to be able to build what they say they're going to build. I fell in love with the place. And then we had Oliver back in the UK. We'd already moved here, but I went back to have him and sort of spend the first few weeks with my family. And then the other 3 children have all been born here and it's our home. So at this point, I can't imagine living anywhere else.
And for people who aren't aware of Nabta Health, what's the opener? How do you explain Nabta Health in 30 seconds to people?
Okay, so our objective is to do for women's health in the Middle East and Africa what M-Pesa did for banking. So to bring the health unbanked into the system through affordable, mobile-first, and subscription-based access. And our focus is on preventative care. So engaging with women on a goal base, pre-symptom, where the cultural stigma and shame have not yet kicked in, and supporting them in building out a care team and set of kind of protocols and pathways that really work for them. I think when we founded Nabta, it was on 3 assumptions. 1, that women are more time poor on average, responsible for 80% of consumption decision-making and 80% of caregiving globally. So whatever we built, it had to give women back their time. So not expecting them to always have to go to clinics or to hospitals, but bringing the care to them in a virtual or a remote setting. So in their offices, in their homes, on the move. The second assumption is that women in general have less money. In the context of angel investment, only 15% of angel investors globally are female. And that statistic is probably over-exaggerated because men will shift their assets under their wives' names to protect them. So whatever we built, it had to be super affordable, and not just affordable for the wealthiest members of society, because the GDP per capita across the region is very disparate, but affordable for the lowest income women and the lowest income countries in the region. And then the third assumption was that because women were excluded from clinical trials until 1993, still today make up a tiny percentage of clinical trial participants. Animal studies, for example, are still 80% male because females are too hormonally complex. So PhD students will be told, you need to exclude female test subjects, otherwise you will not complete your PhD in time. Because of this general exclusion by design of women from healthcare, and that applies to therapeutics, it applies to clinical pathways, it applies to, everything. The car industry introduced the first female test dummies in the last 2 years. We have been driving cars for over 100 years. The assumption in medicine, as in cars, was that women were just anatomically small men, which is incorrect. So because of this, if you look at, again, like the payor setup and how people access care, there's a lot of stages and conditions for women that are excluded. In the essential benefits plan of the UAE, for example, fertility and family planning are not included as standard. This is for expats. Their postpartum care isn't covered or provided as standard. There's nothing around pelvic health, and there's nothing to support menopause. And so, again, the third and final assumption with Nabta was whatever we build, we have to bridge gender equity gaps. We have to build something that looks at the prevailing landscape, and it changes country by country, work out where the gaps are and make sure that our system supports them. So yeah, in terms of the product that we have, we operate a full stack, I guess. We have a digital platform. We have what we call our sovereignty architecture, which is the intelligence layer that allows us to reorient specialist care around the individual based on their goals, so pre-symptom. We have our own clinic. We have a center of excellence that we co-operate with a local hospital, and we're building out our clinical network. And with this kind of hybrid care model, we provide subscription-based access to preventative care to companies. You cannot deliver an employee benefit that isn't universally available. So the subscription-based access is available to men and women, but there are additional things that have been built into it to bridge these equity gaps that I mentioned previously.
And those three assumptions are very detailed, articulate, and clinically backed up by data.
Yes.
Did you, because you started that in year one of coming to Dubai or the UAE, did you already have those assumptions, or were you able to work out those three assumptions in your first year and you decided, look, that's I know this is the direction I want to go in?
I think that data was available at the time. So what led to the founding of Nabta, I went to speak at a conference in Kuwait on diabetes. I got chatting to the organizer, Dr. Masad, not about diabetes, but about the fact that I was pregnant. And about a month or so later, he sent me this long deck of statistics on women's health in the region and said, do you want to do something women's health together? And I was sat in the old Impact Hub in Souq al-Baha. I was on about the second page of this deck when I knew this is the problem I want to solve. This is the company that I want to build. And these three assumptions were garnered from this original set of stats. It probably took us a good 15 to 18 months after that to figure out what we actually wanted to build. This was kind of in our discovery phase of R&D, where we looked at things that were being built in women's health in other parts of the world. We were the first women's health technology company in the Arab world, and trying to work out, how useful are they clinically? You have period tracking apps, for example, but once you know that your period is irregular, what do you do about it? Do you understand why? No. From a period tracking app, potentially not. So you need to see a doctor, but how do you find a doctor who's able to take the inputs from your app and give you meaningful outcomes? How do you know what other tests you need to do? We want to give them answers, not more questions. And so we looked at everything that was being built. We looked at our region, which, unlike the US or Europe, is very disparate in terms of infrastructure, access, and education. And we devised this hybrid healthcare model, coined the term, ended up publishing a book on it with Springer, wrote it pre-pandemic, published it post-pandemic, taking contributions from thought leaders around the world about what a decentralized, person-centric model of care that used an augmented intelligence would look like. It's now a case study with Harvard, with INSEAD, with MIT, and got us named to Time Magazine's Top Health Tech Companies 2025. So there's a general consensus within, innovation-focused sectors that what we're building is the kind of future in terms of healthcare. Now it's just trying to work out how we reorient all of the incumbents within the market, including the payors, including the customers, which for us are companies, to implement this new model.
Well done. Those achievements are great. You should be really proud.
Do you know what? My proudest moments have nothing to do with the big headline achievements. Again, that's a weird reality of business. I am. I think I will breathe my first sigh of relief in almost 9 years when the company is profitable, because at that point it is no longer reliant on me. Until then, it's just noise.
I want to come onto a topic which I like to think that I talk about as much as I can. I've been very fortunate to have become friends and interviewed people, women who have gone through the VC investment stage, if you like. And now you shared a stat about 15%, which may be or maybe not right. The global statistic is maybe 2% of women attract VC investment.
Yes, so 15% are angel investors. 15% of angel investors are female. Globally, yeah, about 2% of venture capital funding goes to female-founded, so solo female-founded businesses where you have one or two female founders. In the MENA region, it's generally lower. So if you take 1 month from last year as an example, September, only 1.2% of venture capital went to founding teams that had any female representation on them, 0.1% to female-founded, and 1.1% to co-founded. And that's actually consistent with the average across the years for the last 2 or 3 years.
Wow. So you're part of the 0.1% here in MENA and not the 2% globally?
I am not. I'm entirely backed by angel investors.
Okay.
I mean, if you take angel investors and venture capital, then yes, we've managed to raise $4.5 million in total, but we have not secured any venture capital funding yet. And in fact, we have a final $1 million to close as part of this pre-Series A. I have decided that we are only going to engage angel investors, syndicates, and small family offices, and we will save our institutional funding for rounds post-profitability. I think there's just too much about what we're building that is new. There aren't very many corporate health companies here. There are even fewer hybrid healthcare companies. Subscription-based access to preventative care. What's that? A kind of focus or on women's health. Too much is new. Too much is still to be proven. So we'll prove it, and then we'll re-engage institutions for investment.
So $4.5 million roughly over the life of the company that you've raised. How would you? I know you recently raised the Series A, right? So it's still very new to you, but or fresh in the mind. But over the last 8 years, how do you summarize raising money for a company for someone who's never done it before? What's the feeling, the process you go through?
Who you know is everything. You can be pretty systematic about raising funds. Raising funds from angel investors and venture capital funds is a totally different ballgame. Angel investors, so your friends and family or friends of friends, who you will engage at the earliest of stages, will primarily invest in you because of you, because of the mission of the company, the problem it's solving, and then potentially by seed because of the people that you have on board, your advisors, your executive team, etc. Venture capital funds back the founder, but more based on their track record. You get a lot of individuals who work for Rocket Internet, for example, where Rocket Internet would have something that looked like a startup in a new market and would appoint a general manager for that startup. And then if they managed to scale it successfully within that market, that was kind of founder proof. Rocket Internet took a very startup mentality to each new market, and it entered and it to its general manager and team. So you get a lot of Rocket Internet founders who have been able to quite quickly and successfully raise relatively large amounts of venture capital here in the region. But yeah, with a venture capital fund, they are, assuming that 1 out of 100 companies will hit 100x, but they're also not going to back any company that couldn't return 100x. They're looking for that scalability. And actually, there aren't a huge number of companies that qualify for venture capital funding on this basis. Like, you basically have to be pure SaaS, unless it is a specialized venture capital fund that has capital that is equal to the requirements of the sector. For example, you're a specialized life sciences fund. You understand that there is going to be a long research and development period, that the potential return on investment for, say, a drug is, in the tens of billions of dollars. Unless you're a specialized fund, most of the generalist funds invest in pure SaaS. They invest in things that scale quickly. When artificial intelligence and particularly agentic AI became commonplace, and you saw companies like Lovable go from nothing to 300,000 ARR in 6 months, that the landscape and kind of venture capital appetite changed again, in terms of what can get them that 100x. So I'm not sure in the early stages as a hybrid company for a generalist fund here that we would ever have qualified for funding. As we progress, as our ARR grows, as the kind of defensibility of our model becomes indisputable, then maybe it's a different ballgame. But still, because there is a physical component to what we provide, if you plug us into a venture capital calculator in terms of return on investment, I'm not sure yet that we would qualify.
Well, to raise awareness and help educate, I guess, me and other people, what's the main differences from women's health, education and service offerings in the Western world, UK and Europe specifically, compared to the Middle East and Africa?
Okay, so if I use the UK and the NHS as an example, which is a really rogue example because it is a, massive kind of public sector organization versus a predominantly private insurance-led market like the UAE. What women's health services are available on the NHS? Firstly, preventative health and screenings, and all of the reminder letters and appointment booking reminders and things are done as standard. So everything recommended from pap smears to mammograms to, antenatal appointments, postpartum appointments are there. And if you have an NHS number, you will receive a reminder for your annual pap smear, for example. Secondly, there are probably today a lot more tech-enabled women's health solutions that are widely available and accepted, including things like at-home, either point-of-care testing or self-sample collection using test kits that are available in the UK that aren't available here yet. So, for example, you can do an HPV sample collection in the UK using basically something that looks like a long cotton bud. Whereas in the UAE, this self-sample collection for HPV hasn't been validated yet with any of the local labs, even though the kind of relevant devices have been registered here. There are a lot more preventative care options available. There are a lot more kind of person-centric options that are still available. Support for some of the stages of women's lives is more established, like postpartum, like menopause. But we have an issue in that, globally, for example, a lot of women's healthcare is not adequately covered by the standard medical curriculum. Most doctors who qualify know very little about menopause, or what they know is, very outdated. So there are a few, diagnostic and treatment options that are available, but we need the standard of women's healthcare provision to be universally elevated, not just here in the region.
To go back to the point you made earlier about data, most of the studies clinically are on male animals and male humans. And I can understand quite easily why that's detrimental to data because, I know the women in my life are very, very different to me. And how do we, I guess I say we, like I have an involvement, but how do you, companies, who needs to change that? How does that change moving forward to start doing studies to get accurate data for both sexes?
So I think there are two things within that, right? There's the general underrepresentation of women in clinical trials and allocation of funding at a research stage to conditions that exclusively affect women or affect women differently and disproportionately. Less than 4% of research funding goes to women's health today. Of that, so 1% goes to non-oncology related conditions. So you've got 3% that goes to cancers and 1% that goes to everything else, which is tiny. And then on top of that, you've got the fact that 92% of clinical trials occur in the US and Europe. The remaining 8% still mostly occur in places like Korea and Japan, where they have to be demographically representative. So only a tiny percentage of clinical trial participants are women of Middle Eastern, African, and South Asian origin. And you see that in health outcomes. For example, if you are a woman of African origin in the US, you are 3 to 4 times more likely to die of pregnancy and childbirth-related complications, not because of necessary societal factors, but because you are a woman of African origin. And again, there are so many examples of how kind of ethnicity plays a factor in health outcomes. Most of the textbooks we had on skin health only featured white Caucasian skin. So medical students, when they study, don't know how skin conditions look on dark skin, on skin with more melanin. That affects your ability as a clinician to diagnose somebody who comes to you with a skin complaint if they are not white Caucasian. So we have this big, we have a data gap for women. We have a massive data gap for the region. How do we bridge it? we start doing more clinical research and population health studies that is based here, because you are never going to eliminate a systemic bias if you continue to innovate in parts of the world where the majority populations that are missing are minority populations.
I think now's a good time to mention that maybe your biggest achievement of all, not putting words in your mouth, I'm sure you may say something similar. You've grown Nabta Health over the 8 years and had and nurtured 4 children along the way, which is just incredible. Can we talk about that for a minute? Because I know building a company is tough on its own. Having a child is complex and tough. And, just tell me about that journey. 4 children along the way in Nabta Health. Just describe it.
I think we are lucky in the UAE in that we can get affordable childcare and housekeeping in a way that doesn't happen in other parts of the world. We have an amazing nanny at home she's actually more of a housekeeper, really, who is my support system. I mean, when I started Nabta, actually, even 4 years prior to founding Nabta, I remember having a moment where I was like, my mom being around for us was very important growing up. She was there when we got home from school. She was always there. But I also knew that I'm not wired to not work. I just am not. It would drive me mad. So, or not work outside of the home, I should say. And so I determined that whatever work I did, I was going to make sure that I was there for my kids in the morning. I was there to pick them up from school. I was there until they went to bed, and then I would work again. And so since founding Nabta and having kids, that's how I've structured my time. Like, I get up between 5 and 5:45. I exercise. I get the kids up at 7. I drop them off at school at 8:30. I work until I pick them up at 4:30. I'm with them until they go to bed at 7:30, and then I work again. And I actually now try to limit that post-bedtime work to a couple of hours. There was a long, long period of time where I would go to the nearest mall and I would work until the lights went off at midnight. Not good for my health and sanity. I was not getting enough sleep. But yeah, I determined that I wanted to be there for the kids, for any children, my hypothetical children at that point. Structured my time around them, made sure that Nabta, as it's grown up, has allowed all of the people that we employ to structure their time similarly. So we are one of a handful of accredited parent-friendly companies under the Early Childhood Authority, because we offer, for example, shared parental leave of a year. So men and women can take up to 3 months fully paid, 6 months half paid, and 3 months unpaid leave after they have a baby. We offer flexible and remote working. We offer menstrual leave, which extends from menstruation all the way through menopause. We offer emergency leave if you have a family member that falls sick, special leave for women who suffer miscarriages or stillbirths. We offer a whole load of different things to try and enable our team to adequately support their families and honor their caregiving obligations. What has it been like building a business and 4 babies in parallel? I think I underestimated how exhausted I was a lot of the time. You think that you're running at kind of full capacity. And I'm now the most postpartum I've been in 9 years. I look back and I'm like, you were pretty tired most of the time. I think every funding round we did, I was either heavily pregnant or newly postpartum. That impacted the fundraising journey just as you would expect it to. I think my favorite question I ever got from an investor when I was 38 weeks pregnant with baby number 2 was, Sophie, Nabta is a company with huge growth potential. You clearly have other growth priorities. How can I be certain that you're the person to run this business? Managed to flip them, by the way, came back to them with answers around commercial growth. A lot of these, risk mitigation measures we had in place, like the board advisory board team, etc., they came in with $100,000, one of our largest investors at that time. But yeah, it's been a challenge. I think, again, you have to be pretty certain that the business that you're building is the business you're meant to be building. I've said to people before, like, I would have to be physically incapacitated to not get up in the morning and want to build Nabta. Women's health is an unhealthy obsession. Like, I will be working in this field until the end of my natural life, which I said to someone the other day and they were like, that's intense. I was like, maybe, but it's true, And there's also no way that I would put my children down or stop thinking about them or kind of renege on my duties as a mother. So when you've got things that depend on you, they depend on you. That's that.
And let's just talk about moving forward now after the raise specifically. For people who have never raised money, maybe they're early in their founder journey. I'm sure there's lots of people watching who are. Where do you even start to deploy $2 million in investment?
The $2 million funding announcement was a little bit of a strategic announcement because as with our entire fundraising journey, we've raised ticket by ticket, bit by bit, and every ticket has covered like our immediate runway, the next 2 to 3 months. So this is $2 million that we'd raised over 12 to 18 months. And we announced it, but the $1 million is the bit that gives us a proper runway to get to profitability. I think there are many, many things that I've learned basically by never really having enough money. We had periods, particularly when we started commercializing in April 2023, where we literally with a team wrote $0 marketing budget, where the team had to, with no money and just with their own hands and their time, which they were being paid for, figure out how to market the company effectively. So a lot of socials, a lot of event attendance, a lot of showing up to things, talking about the business, word of mouth referrals, dropping comments in Facebook groups, all of these sorts of things. I think you learn to operate in a very lean way. I think people can get a bit like funding happy. I've seen a lot of companies who have raised money, it's landed in the bank account, and within 3-4 months, they've doubled or trebled their monthly operating expenditure. Like, on what basis have you done that? If you don't have proportionate increases in your revenue, those increases aren't justified. Like, cash is king. If you are not yet profitable, you need to protect your cash flows. And again, I think, having a very good idea about key hires in advance, assuming that you could also always do more with less, hiring the right people, trying to optimize the time and the energy of the people that you hire, like continuously looking at optimizing is so important. Like going into or coming out of a round, you shouldn't be thinking about how you increase your monthly operating expenditure. You should be looking at how you reduce it further. Like if you go in and I want to maintain this, keep it stable, or even reduce it, like you're looking for marginal gains, for optimization, for capital efficiency, that will get you a lot further. Do you know how much Google raised before they IPO'd?
No, I'm not sure.
$26 million.
Wow.
You think about what tech companies raise today to do a fraction of what a Google has done. It's mind-blowing. Like, it is possible to do a lot with not very much. And again, if you're lucky enough to secure funding, don't take it for granted. Continue to operate leanly, like use the cash wisely. You never know when it's going to run out.
And in terms of region focus for the next, I guess this calendar year, 2026, where are you looking to expand? And what are the plans where people can use Nabta, see Nabta, and interact with it?
So for our full hybrid and physical only offerings, UAE. Our goal this year is to get to profitability in the UAE, and it's our only goal. We have a digital only offering that we can make available to customers, so insurers and brokers predominantly, but also companies anywhere in the world. But that's not our focus. If that grows, if there's demand for it organically, great. Our focus is getting the full hybrid model to profitability in the UAE. Once we do that, GCC, Qatar, Saudi, and then after that, we will look at expanding into our first market in Africa, likely South Africa and the South African sort of trading union, SACU. After that, EAC, so the East African trading bloc. I don't know, we'll take it one step at a time. Ultimately, my goal is to IPO on the Dubai financial market. We had an original time horizon of 2030. I'm hoping we can still hit that.
And you gave a very good explanation earlier of Nabta Health. I'm sure people listened to that and thought that sounds very, very interesting, maybe even suitable to them or someone they know. But who is just to understand, you sell to companies?
We sell direct to companies.
Yeah.
And we also sell through insurers and brokers. So by the end of Q1, we will be available via a couple of different insurance providers here in the UAE. So we are a benefit that you can ask for. But for now, just if it's something that you think might be interesting to you, and I mean, the benefits of preventative care are proven. We understand them very well in the context of cars. For example, like with your car, you are required by law to take insurance in order to have a car on the road. But in order to renew that insurance every year, you have to complete an MOT. And if any kind of serious issues come out of the MOT, you have to address those before renewing the insurance. In the UAE, we have the insurance only. We don't do the MOT. So Nabta is the MOT. We are the mechanism that you can use to baseline your workforce health, and a mechanism that ultimately will result in a reduction in the number and cost of claims against your premium, stabilize or bring your insurance premiums down. And of course, there's the added bonus of improving the health of your employees.
And we spoke earlier about bad business and good business. So who is the ideal business that would onboard this? What amount of employees would they have? What industry are they in?
I think there are different value adds for companies at different stages. Predominantly today, we're looking at companies with more than 150 employees. A lot of the companies that reach out to us proactively are either large kind of national companies based here or multinationals that have an office in Dubai. So we work with a number of banks. We work with a couple of big consulting firms. We've been onboarded as a supplier now with a couple of big local groups. So larger companies, I guess, where, an 11 to 30% in an increase in an insurance premium year on year is really going to hurt. Probably our ideal customer profile. But we also add, a significant amount of value to companies with fewer than 10 employees, where because they're taking individual premiums for every employee and having to declare all pre-existing conditions, anything other than the essential benefits plan is potentially not affordable. So then as a smaller company, you're aware that you are not potentially providing your employees with the health coverage and support that they need. And so again, something like us that comes in, the Baseline's Health provides like whole person, multi-specialty support very affordably is a good option. You can still take your essential benefits plan, and we are a nice add-on.
My final question is a very, very important one. Let's imagine somebody's watching this and is pregnant, maybe just had a child and is unsure about their career, the focus it's going to go and the direction that they are going in. For someone who has grown something very special and had 4 children on the way, what advice would you give them?
I think you can do anything. There was a point where your 5-year-old self believed absolutely in you and your ability to be whoever you wanted and to do whatever you liked. And you didn't have ceilings and you didn't have limits, and they'd not been handed to you yet. You've not heard them. You're going to feel very vulnerable in the days immediately after giving birth. I mean, your hormones are going to do wild things, and people are going to start doubting you in ways that you've probably not been doubted before. Don't listen to them. Listen to the 5-year-old you.
Amazing. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast, Sophie.
Thanks for having me.
And that's the end of the podcast. I really, really hope you enjoyed listening to that as much as I did recording it. Make sure you log into next week's episode, and please like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you next week.